The ticket agent's voice was flat, almost bored. "Ma'am, your name isn't on the reservation." Eleanor Harper stood frozen at the Amtrak counter in Seattle, her fingers tightening around the silk scarf she'd tied around her neck, a gift from James, her late husband, for their 20th anniversary. Through the platform's wide glass window, she saw her son Daniel and daughter Claire already boarding the coastal starlight, their faces lit with easy smiles, as if they hadn't just left their 65-year-old mother behind. They'd planned this trip to San Francisco, a family getaway to honor what would have been Eleanor and James's 40th wedding anniversary. "Just show up, Mom," they'd texted in the group chat. So she did, with her suitcase packed and her heart full of hope. But now, here she was, stranded at the gate, no warning, no apology. She watched them through the glass, Daniel adjusting his backpack, Claire laughing with her kids. They waved at her, a quick flick of their hands, like she was a neighbor they'd bumped into at the grocery store. Eleanor's chest tightened, but her face stayed calm, her gray eyes steady. She'd spent decades swallowing moments like this, small slights, forgotten invitations, the way her kids assumed she'd always be fine, always be there. Not this time. She turned back to the agent, her voice soft but firm. "When's the next train to San Francisco?" "There's one in 2 hours," the agent said, tapping her screen. "Only luxury cabins left. They're pricey." Eleanor didn't flinch. She slid her credit card across the counter, the one she hadn't touched since James passed 5 years ago. "Book it," she said. "The best cabin you've got." 2 hours later, Eleanor sat in a private sleeper car, the kind with polished wood paneling and a window that framed the Cascades like a painting. The attendant handed her a steaming cup of chamomile tea, and the warmth of it sank into her palms. She pulled out her small leather notebook, the one she'd carried since her days teaching English literature, filled with scribbled lines from Shakespeare and Dickinson. She opened it to a fresh page and wrote 3 words in her neat, looping, script new journey plan. As the train hummed forward, cutting through the misty Pacific Northwest, Eleanor's thoughts weren't on the family who'd left her behind. They were on the will she'd drafted years ago, the one that named Daniel and Claire as equal beneficiaries. At 30,000 feet, people rewrite their lives. On this train, Eleanor began rewriting her legacy. Eleanor Harper was never one to make a fuss. At 65, she carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who'd spent decades shaping young minds as an English literature teacher in Seattle's public schools. Her hair, a soft silver now, was always swept into a loose bun, held by a tortoiseshell clip she'd bought at a flea market with her late husband James. She favored simple dresses, linen in summer, wool in winter, always with a scarf or a brooch that hinted at a life full of small, deliberate choices. In her purse, she kept a leather-bound notebook, its pages crowded with quotes from Shakespeare's sonnets or Emily Dickinson's slant rhymes, jotted down during lunch breaks or quiet evenings. That notebook was her sanctuary, a place where her thoughts could breathe when the world felt too heavy. For years, Eleanor had been the steady anchor for her family. Her son, Daniel, 40, was a software engineer who always seemed too busy to call unless he needed something, like the time she paid off his grad school loans, calling it a gift so he wouldn't feel the weight of it. Her daughter, Claire, 38, ran a bustling event planning business, and Eleanor had spent countless weekends watching Claire's twins, baking cookies for their school fundraisers, or driving them to soccer practice when Claire was swamped. She never asked for thanks, and she rarely got it. To her kids, she was just Mom, reliable, low maintenance, the one who'd always show up with a casserole or a check when things got tight. But there were cracks beneath that steady surface, ones Eleanor had learned to ignore. She remembered the Thanksgiving when Claire said, "We thought you'd be with Aunt Susan," leaving Eleanor to eat alone with a plate of leftovers. or Daniel's promotion party, where she arrived with a 8-pay bottle of wine, only to find no seat saved for her at the restaurant. She'd smiled through it all, tucking the hurt into the margins of her notebook, next to lines like Dickinson's, "Hope is the thing with feathers." She told herself it was just how families were, messy, distracted, but still hers. This trip to San Francisco was supposed to be different. It was Eleanor's idea, a way to mark what would have been her 40th wedding anniversary with James, who'd passed 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. She'd shared the plan in the family group chat months ago. A train ride down the coast, a few days by the bay, a toast to James under the Golden Gate Bridge. "Don't worry, Mom," Claire had texted back. "We've got it covered, just show up." Daniel chimed in with a thumbs-up emoji, and Eleanor felt a flicker of warmth. She spent the week before the trip picking out the perfect scarf, 8T. Silk one, deep blue, dotted with tiny white starfish, a nod to the coastal journey. She polished her suitcase's wheels, packed her notebook, and even tucked in a photo of her and James from their honeymoon, their faces sunlit and laughing on a pier. At King Street Station, the air smelled of coffee and rain-damp concrete. Eleanor arrived early, her dress pressed, her scarf knotted just so. She spotted Daniel first, his tall frame hunched over his phone, and Claire nearby, herding her twins toward the platform. They barely looked up when she waved, her suitcase rolling softly behind her. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said, his voice clipped, like he was checking her off a list. Claire flashed a quick smile, the kind you give a co-worker passing in the hall. "You're here," she said, as if Eleanor's presence was a surprise. Eleanor didn't let her smile falter. She pulled out her phone, ready to show the ticket they'd promised to book. But when she opened the Amtrak app, the screen was blank. No QR code, no confirmation. Her heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "I think there's a mix-up with my ticket," she said, stepping toward the counter. That's when the agent delivered the blow. No Eleanor Harper on the reservation. Just Daniel, Claire, her husband, and the twins. 5 names, no room for a 6th. Eleanor stood at the Amtrak counter, her fingers tracing the edge of her silk scarf as the ticket agent's words sank in. "No Eleanor Harper on the reservation," the woman repeated, her eyes flicking to the screen. Eleanor turned toward Daniel and Claire, who were lingering near the platform, their kids tugging at their sleeves. Claire caught her gaze and offered a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mom," she said, stepping closer, her voice light but hollow. "There wasn't room on this train. We figured you'd just grab the next one. They run all day." Daniel nodded, barely looking up from his phone. "Yeah, it's no big deal," he said, his tone as casual as if he'd forgotten her coffee. "Order." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she didn't let her face betray her. She'd spent years perfecting that mask, smiling through missed birthdays, nodding when her kids forgot to call. But this was different. This was her anniversary trip, a chance to honor James, and they'd left her standing at the station like an afterthought. "You didn't tell me," Eleanor said quietly, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through their excuses. Claire laughed, a nervous trill that landed like a wrong note. "I thought Daniel mentioned it," she said, glancing at her brother. Daniel shrugged. "We assumed you'd be fine, Mom." That word "fine" hit her like a stone wrapped in cotton. She stood there, her suitcase at her feet, absorbing the weight of it. They waved as they herded the kids toward the train, Claire calling out, "Text you when we get there," as if they'd just parted at a mall. Through the glass, Eleanor saw Daniel settle into his seat, Claire adjusting her twins' headphones. The train pulled away, its whistle a low moan that seemed to carry her hurt with it. She turned back to the counter, her hands steady now. "The next train to San Francisco," she said. "What's available?" The agent tapped her keyboard. One in 2 hours. Only luxury cabins left. Sleeper cars, first-class amenities. Eleanor didn't ask the price. She slid her credit card across the counter, the one she'd kept untouched since James's passing, and said, "I'll take it. Window side, please." 2 hours later, Eleanor stepped into a sleeper car that felt like a different era. The walls were warm mahogany, the seat plush velvet, and a wide window offered a view of the Cascades dusted with early snow. The attendant, a young man with a soft southern accent, handed her a cup of chamomile tea, its steam curling like a quiet promise. Eleanor settled in, her scarf draped over her lap, and opened her leather notebook. She wrote one phrase in her careful script: "New journey plan." The words felt like a vow, not to her kids, but to herself. The train rocked gently as it sped toward San Francisco, and Eleanor let her mind wander. She thought of the group chat, Claire's breezy, "We've got it handled," and Daniel's thumbs-up emoji. She'd trusted them, packed her hopes into that suitcase, only to find they hadn't even counted her in. When she arrived in San Francisco, she didn't go to the hotel Claire had booked for the family. Instead, she found a small bed and breakfast near the Mission District, a place with creaking wooden floors and a garden that smelled of lavender and salt air. The owner, a woman with kind eyes, handed her a key and said, "You look like you're starting something." Eleanor smiled, a real one this time. "Maybe I am," she said. The next morning she rented a bicycle, its basket wobbling as she pedaled along the Embarcadero, the bay sparkling under a pale sun. She stopped at a bench overlooking Alcatraz and pulled out her notebook. She started, a list not of poems or quotes, but of moments, times she'd been overlooked, pushed aside, but smiled anyway. Her 60th birthday, when Claire sent a text instead of visiting. Daniel's daughter's recital, where Eleanor brought flowers but wasn't invited to dinner. Last Christmas when they said, "We thought you'd be with Margaret." She counted, 15 moments, each one a small cut, written in her careful hand. She didn't cry. She sat there, the sea breeze tugging at her scarf, and felt something shift. Not anger, but clarity. She closed the notebook and pedaled back to the bed and breakfast, her mind already turning to the will she'd drafted years ago, the one that left everything to Daniel and Claire. They'd assumed she'd always be fine, but fine wasn't enough, anymore. Eleanor wasn't just on a train to San Francisco. She was on a journey to reclaim her place, not in their world, but in her own. Eleanor woke to the sound of gulls outside her window at the San Francisco bed and breakfast, their cries sharp against the soft hum of the city waking up. She'd slept better than she expected, the kind of sleep that comes when you stop carrying someone else's weight. Her notebook lay open on the nightstand, the list of 15 slights staring back at her, each one a reminder of how long she'd let herself be invisible. She traced the words with her finger, then closed. The book. Today she wasn't going to dwell. She was going to act. She dressed in white linen, her starfish scarf knotted loosely, and rode her rented bicycle to Fisherman's Wharf, where the family was staying at a sleek hotel Claire had boasted about in the group chat. Eleanor didn't plan to confront them. She just wanted to see them, to confirm what her heart was starting to understand. From a cafe across the street, she watched them spill out onto the hotel's terrace. Claire was sipping a mimosa, her twins splashing in the pool. Daniel was on his phone, as always, while his wife scrolled through hers. The kids laughed, the adults lounged, and there was no empty chair, no extra plate, no sign they'd even noticed she hadn't joined them. Claire glanced up, spotting Eleanor through the cafe window. Her face froze for a moment before she waved, a half-hearted gesture. "Mom, you made it!" she called, loud enough for the other guests to hear. Eleanor walked over, her steps measured. "I'm staying nearby," she said simply, her voice calm but firm. Claire blinked. "Oh, you didn't check in with us? Daniel looked up, offering a quick nod. Thought you'd want your own space. Eleanor let the words hang in the air, noting the details. No towel saved for her, no drink offered, not even a glance from the twins. Didn't seem like there was room, she said, her eyes steady. They laughed, a little too loudly, and Claire started to say, "We didn't think," but Eleanor just smiled, a small final thing, and walked away. That evening she sat at a waterfront bistro, alone but not lonely, savoring a glass of Pinot and a plate of grilled halibut. Her iPad phone buzzed with a notification, a new post from Claire on Instagram. The photo showed the family at the wharf, all smiles, with a caption that made Eleanor's stomach turn. "Grateful for family time. Thanks to Mom for always holding us up." The post was flooded with heart emojis, comments gushing about their amazing bond. Eleanor stared at the screen, her fork still. It wasn't just the lie. It was the performance, the way they painted her as the perfect mother while she sat alone, uninvited. Then came the email that changed everything. It was from her bank, a routine alert about account authorization, updates. Eleanor opened it, expecting nothing, but her breath caught when she saw Daniel's name listed as a co-manager on her savings account, the one she'd set up for her grandkids' college funds. He'd applied for access weeks ago without her knowledge, claiming to act on her behalf. The bank needed her confirmation to proceed. Eleanor's hands trembled, not with fear, but with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just neglect. This was manipulation, a calculated move to control what she'd worked her whole life to build. She didn't call Daniel. She didn't text Claire. Instead, she opened her laptop and drafted an email to her attorney, Margaret's cousin, a woman named Susan who'd handled James's estate. Subject: urgent will revision. "I need to update my estate plan," she wrote. "Significant changes. Required." She hit send, then opened her notebook and started a new list. Steps to freedom. The first entry: remove Daniel and Claire from all accounts and inheritance. She didn't stop there. She called the bank the next morning, revoking Daniel's access with a voice so calm it surprised even her. "He is not authorized," she said, "and he never will be." Back at the bed and breakfast, Eleanor began writing something else, a blog post titled "The Train I Took Alone." She poured her heart into it, not with anger, but with honesty. She wrote about the station, the empty reservation, the scarf she'd worn for James, and the moment she chose herself by booking that luxury cabin. She wrote about the 15 times she'd been overlooked, each one a thread she was finally cutting loose. She didn't expect anyone to read it. It was for her, a way to mark the journey she'd begun. But when she hit publish on a whim, something shifted. By the next evening, the post had been shared on a forum for women over 50, then another for retirees. Comments poured in, hundreds, then thousands. "They left me too," one woman wrote. "Thank you for saying it out loud," said another. A publisher in Portland emailed, asking if she'd consider turning her story into a book. Eleanor sat back, her tea cold in her hands, stunned by the ripple she'd started. She wasn't just rewriting her will, she was rewriting her place in the world. But the real shock came late that night, when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Ethan, Daniel's 16-year-old son, her quiet, bookish grandson, who'd always lingered a little longer at her house, asking about her poetry books. "Grandma," the message read, "I saw Mom's journal. They plan to leave you out of the trip. Dad's been talking about your savings account too. I'm sorry. Can we talk? Just me. I want to know your story, the real one." Eleanor stared at the screen, her heart caught between ache and hope. Ethan's words were a crack in the wall she'd built, a reminder that not every tie was broken. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she opened her notebook and added one more line to her list. For Ethan, a chance to listen. She'd spent years teaching her students to find truths in stories. Now, she was living one, and someone was finally asking to hear it. Eleanor sat at the desk in her Seattle home, the morning light filtering through the lace curtains she'd hung with James years ago. Her notebook was open, its pages now a map of her journey, lists, reflections, and the first draft of a book that had grown from a blog post into something real. New Journey. A Solo Ticket to Freedom was no longer just a title. It was her truth, bound in a matte blue cover with gold lettering, delivered to her doorstep by a publisher who'd seen her story light up corners of the internet. She ran her fingers over the embossed words, feeling the weight of what she'd built, not for her children, but for herself. The book's release came quietly, but its impact was anything but. Women over 50, and some younger, found it through online forums, book clubs, and shared posts on social media. They wrote to Eleanor, their letters piling up in a wicker basket by her fireplace. One woman from Ohio said she'd left a family group chat after reading Eleanor's story, choosing peace over obligation. A retired nurse from Texas sent a photo of her own train ticket, a solo trip to Santa Fe, with a note. "You reminded me I'm worth a seat." Eleanor read every letter, her heart swelling with a purpose she hadn't known she could claim. She was invited to speak on a local radio show, Silver Voices, a program for older adults. The host, a woman with a laugh like warm honey, asked her to share her story. Eleanor sat in the studio, her scarf folded neatly in her lap, and spoke with a clarity that felt new. "They left me at the station," she said, her voice steady. "But I didn't wait for them to come back. I bought my own ticket, and I learned that sometimes the best journeys start alone." When the host asked if she regretted cutting her children out of her will, Eleanor paused, then said, "Regret is for people who don't learn. I chose to protect what I'd built, not punish. That's the difference." The switchboard lit up with calls, listeners sharing their own stories of being overlooked, their voices echoing hers. Eleanor hadn't heard from Daniel or Claire since San Francisco, not until she mailed them each a copy of her updated will, notarized and final, with a yellow sticky note in her neat handwriting. No further discussion needed. The document named Margaret, her friend of 30 years, as the primary beneficiary, with a trust for her grandchildren that could only be accessed if they proved respect and independence. She'd sent the packages certified mail, not out of spite, but to draw a line as clear as the tracks she'd followed south. Claire didn't respond. Daniel sent a single text. "Really, Mom, this is how you play it." Eleanor didn't reply. She tucked his message into a folder labeled Old Tracks alongside Claire's Instagram post and closed the drawer. But there was Ethan, her grandson, who'd become a quiet light in her life. They met at a small bookstore near her house, a place with creaking shelves and the smell of old paper. Ethan, at 16, was all elbows and earnest eyes, clutching a copy of The Catcher in the Rye he'd borrowed from her last visit. "I didn't know they'd hurt you like that," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I want to know you, Grandma, not their version." Eleanor listened, her heart softening but cautious. She told him about her teaching days, her love for Dickinson, the way James used to hum Sinatra while cooking. Ethan listened, really listened, and when he left, he hugged her, a real hug, not the quick pat her kids used to give. She opened a small savings account for him the next day, not a fortune, but enough to say, "I see you too." It was locked until he was 25, with a note, for the boy who chose to hear. Eleanor's life wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She joined a poetry workshop at the community center, where she read her work aloud to women with laugh lines and stories of their own. She planted lavender in her backyard, the same kind she'd smelled in San Francisco, and let it grow wild. And when spring came, she booked a trip to Paris, a dream she'd shelved when James got sick. She chose the Eurostar from London, a first-class cabin with a window that framed the French countryside like a Monet painting. She packed light, a few dresses, her notebook, a single scarf, and boarded without looking back. On the train, Eleanor opened her book, New Journey, to the dedications page, to the women who waited at the station, then chose to board alone. She smiled, not at the past, but at the present, at the life she'd carved out when others had carved her out of theirs. The attendant brought her a glass of Prosecco, its bubbles catching the light, and she raised it to the window, not in a toast, but in agreement with herself. The lesson wasn't loud or flashy, but it was hers, and it was for anyone listening. Sometimes, she'd written in the book's final chapter, you have to let go of the people who don't save you a seat, not because you don't love them, but because you love yourself more. Life isn't about waiting for someone else's train. It's about buying your own ticket and writing the journey you deserve. As the Eurostar hummed toward Paris, Eleanor closed her book and leaned back, the countryside blurring past. She wasn't running from her past. She was riding toward her future, one she'd chosen one seat at a time.